fade into, "Hello, my name is Janet." If you had asked me years ago what I imagined my life to be, I would have painted you a picture that was very close to reality. I was truly blessed. Back in those days, I had everything one could wish for: a loving husband, a beautiful baby boy, and a cozy home filled with laughter and joy. Let me start with James, my rock, the man who stood by my side through thick and thin. We met in a quaint little cafe on a rainy afternoon. I was sipping a latte, trying to chase away the cold, and there he was, seated at the next table, reading a book. When our eyes met, it was as if the world stopped. "Excuse me, would you mind watching my stuff while I go get a refill?" he asked, breaking the moment. "Of course, go ahead," I replied, secretly thrilled for the excuse to strike up a conversation when he returned. From that simple interaction, our love story blossomed. It wasn't long before we were deeply in love, taking road trips on weekends and planning our future together. James proposed to me at the very same cafe where we first met. He got down on one knee and looked into my eyes. "Janet, will you make me the happiest man alive?" With my eyes filling up with tears, I said, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." We were married less than a year later in a ceremony that was the epitome of our love, simple, genuine, and full of laughter. 2 years into our marriage, Mark was born. James and I were ecstatic. As I held our little bundle of joy in my arms, for the first time, James leaned in and whispered, "You two are my whole world." And so, we were a family. James was a hands-on dad, always there for every milestone, every moment. "Look at him, Janet. Our boy's going to break hearts someday," James would often say as we watched Mark clumsily toddle around. Our home was a sanctuary of happiness. Weekends were for family outings, picnics, visits to the zoo, or simple movie nights at home. My favorite memories are those lazy Sunday mornings, the smell of pancakes wafting through the air, James playfully arguing with Mark over the last piece of bacon. "Let the boy have it, James. You're setting a bad example," I'd laughingly scold him. "But I'm his dad. It's my parental right to steal his bacon," James would retort, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Mark would giggle, thrilled to be part of this adult banter. Yes, life was a blissful dream, full of love, full of promise. Those were our golden days, days I believed would stretch on endlessly into a future of unbounded joy. I couldn't have been more wrong. That's a tale for another chapter. So there it is, the opening chapter of my life. A chapter that set the tone for the deep love and commitment that would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. But those challenges, heartbreaks, and unbelievable turns of fate are stories for later. For now, I dwell in the beauty of those days gone by, days that are my refuge and my strength for all the challenges that lay ahead. Life has a cruel way of jolting us out of complacency, doesn't it? In the blink of an eye, my dream life became a waking nightmare. James was driving home from work one fateful evening when his car was struck by a drunk driver. The impact was fatal. He didn't make it. The phone rang, its shrill tones slicing through the silence of the night. I picked it up, and my world shattered. "Mrs. Janet, this is Officer Williams. There's been an accident involving your husband." My heart sank. "Is he okay? Tell me he's okay." "I'm sorry, Mom. He didn't make it." Those words were like a death knell. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling uncontrollably. When I told Mark, who was just 5 years old at the time, he didn't fully grasp what had happened. "Where's Daddy?" he asked innocently. "Mark, Daddy had to go to heaven. He's watching over us now, but he can't come back," I explained, my voice choking up. But I want to play cars with him, Mark protested, his face scrunching up, teetering on the edge of tears. I hugged him tightly. I know, sweetheart, I know. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, reality began to set in. I was a widow, a single mom. The income that James and I pooled together was now halved, and I had to fend for Mark and myself. The bills began to pile up, and the responsibilities weighed heavily on my shoulders. I took up 2 jobs to keep us afloat. By day, I worked as a secretary, and by night, I moonlighted as a waitress at a local diner. The hours were grueling, and the exhaustion wore me down. There were days when I'd come home, completely spent, and Mark would already be asleep. "Do you have to go to work again tonight, Mom?" Mark asked me one evening, his eyes filled with a longing that broke my heart. "I do, Mark. We need to pay the bills and buy groceries. But I promise this weekend we'll do something fun, just you and me," I reassured him, masking my own disappointment. Sleep was a luxury I could barely afford, but the fire within me, fueled by my love for Mark and the responsibility I felt towards him, kept me going. It was hard, excruciatingly so. The woman who once had it all was now scraping by, struggling to hold on to her family, her home, and her dignity. Yet, in the midst of all the hardship, Mark became my beacon of hope. I lived for his smiles, his hugs, his "I love you, Mom." They were what drove me to wake up each day and face the world, even when all I wanted to do was curl up and weep for what I had lost. And so, the solemn years passed. Years of sorrow, years of struggle, but they were also years of immense growth, resilience, and unbreakable bonds. Those years taught me that while happiness may be fleeting, strength and love endure. I was building a foundation, unaware that it would soon be put to an even greater test. But that, dear reader, is a story for another chapter. Time is a peculiar thing. When you're caught in the depths of sorrow, it feels like a snail dragging its feet across a vast, empty landscape. But eventually, the sun manages to peek through the darkest clouds, and you find a reason to smile again. For me, that ray of sunshine came in the form of Sarah, the woman who stole my son Mark's heart. I'll never forget the day Mark introduced her to me. They had been dating for a few months, and he told me little snippets about her, how they met at a mutual friend's party, how she was studying to become a psychologist, and how he found himself completely smitten by her. But meeting her was another experience altogether. "Mom, this is Sarah," Mark said, beaming as he led her into our modest living room. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Janet." Sarah greeted me with a radiant smile, extending her hand for a firm shake. "Please call me Janet," I replied, instantly warming up to her. "So, you're the one who has my son head over heels, huh?" Sarah chuckled, guilty as charged. But I must say he's equally good at making my heart skip a beat. It was evident. They were in love. You could see it in the way they looked at each other, the way they laughed together, and even in the way they engaged in playful banter. The atmosphere was electric with their youthful energy, and for the first time in years, I felt as if happiness was within our reach again. "Mom, I'm thinking about proposing to Sarah," Mark confided in me one evening after dinner. We were alone in the kitchen, cleaning up. My heart swelled with joy. "Are you sure about this, Mark? Marriage is a big step." "I've never been more sure about anything, Mom," he assured me, his eyes shining with sincerity. "She's the one. I can feel it." And so, not long after that conversation, Mark proposed, Sarah said yes, and the wedding planning was underway. Even though money was tight, We all pitched in to make sure it was a day to remember. Friends offered to take photographs. A family member baked the wedding cake, and Sarah's uncle offered his sprawling backyard for the venue. "You're going to make a beautiful bride," I told Sarah as we picked out her wedding gown. "And you'll be the most beautiful mother of the groom," she responded, her eyes twinkling. The wedding day finally arrived. The sun was shining brightly, as if even the heavens were smiling down on them. The vows they exchanged were heartfelt and genuine, promises for a future filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride," announced the officiant. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, I couldn't help but shed tears of happiness. Mark had found love, and I had gained a daughter. In that moment, I felt the years of hardship slowly fade into the background, overshadowed by the immense joy that filled the present. For once, I felt cautiously optimistic about what the future would bring. Love had returned to our lives in the form of a new chapter that we were all eager to write together. Yet, the bittersweet tapestry of life was far from finished, and new trials were waiting just around the corner. But that, of course, is a tale for another chapter. After the wedding, a palpable sense of new beginnings filled the air. Mark and Sarah settled into married life, and soon enough, they gave me the news that filled my heart with indescribable joy. They were expecting a child, my first grandchild. I could barely contain my excitement. "When's the baby due?" I asked, my eyes already tearing up at the good news. "In about 7 months," Sarah gleamed, her hand instinctively going to her still, flat belly. Mark grinned, wrapping his arm around Sarah. "You're going to be a grandma, Mom." I hugged them both tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of both of you." During the pregnancy, I found myself getting more and more involved. Baby shopping, doctor visits, you name it. I was there. When my grandson was born, I was right there in the delivery room holding Sarah's hand as she brought a new life into the world. "He's perfect," I murmured, as I held my tiny grandson for the first time, his newborn eyes squinting against the hospital lights. "He really is." Sarah sighed, exhausted but blissful. The first few years flew by like a whirlwind of milestones. First words, first steps, first day of school. I found immense joy in my role as a doting grandmother, often offering to babysit so Mark and Sarah could have some time to themselves. Everything seemed perfect. But as the saying goes, when things seem too good to be true, they probably are. I started to notice the change in Sarah during one of my routine visits. She seemed distant, less invested in the family than she used to be. She was polite but reserved, a stark contrast to the warm and vibrant young woman I had come to love as a daughter. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" I asked her during one visit when we were alone in the kitchen. She forced a smile. "Everything's fine, Janet. Just tired, you know how it is." But I knew deep down something was off. The day came when Mark called me, his voice strained and tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Mom, can we talk? It's about my son." My heart sank. "Of course, Mark. What's going on?" That's when he dropped the bombshell. "Mom, he has cancer. We got the diagnosis yesterday." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Oh my God, how's Sarah handling it?" "That's just it, Mom." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah thinks pursuing aggressive treatment would be a waste of money. She's not ready to go through with it." I was shocked. "And you, what do you think?" "I don't want to argue with her, Mom. I love her, but I'm torn." Mark sounded helpless. It was in that moment that I realized how complicated adult life could be, how the lines between right and wrong could blur and leave you feeling lost and confused. And it was also the moment I realized that the looming clouds on the horizon were about to break, unleashing a storm that would test the foundations of our family in ways we could never have imagined. But as you'll see, it's often in the midst of the most devastating storms that we discover what we're truly made of. But that's a story for another chapter. The diagnosis was like a bolt of lightning that fractured our family tree. My grandson had leukemia, and we were at an impasse. I found it increasingly hard to reconcile Sarah's reluctance to go forward with the treatment. How could a mother not move mountains for her sick child? Was money truly more valuable than a life, especially the life of your own flesh and blood? The tension came to a head during a family meeting at Mark and Sarah's home. The room was thick with unspoken words and carefully masked emotions. My grandson, unaware of the gravity of the situation, was at a friend's house. "Look, if you're so worried about him, why don't you take him in?" Sarah finally said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that evening. The room went silent. Mark looked like he was about to say something, but hesitated, caught in an emotional tug of war between his wife and his mother. "Is that what you want, Sarah?" I asked, maintaining a calm exterior despite the turmoil inside me. "I just think it's an option," she responded coldly. "Mark, do you agree with this?" I needed to know where my son stood. Mark swallowed hard. "If you can give him care he needs, Mom, maybe it's for the best." And so it was decided. Within a week, my grandson moved in with me. I retired from my job to focus entirely on his treatment, liquidating some of my savings to fund it. The chemotherapy was brutal. Many nights were spent holding a bucket for him, comforting him through the nausea, the pain, and the relentless fatigue. "Grandma, why do I have to be sick?" he asked me one night, his small frame drowned in the hospital bed. "Sometimes bad things happen, sweetheart, and we don't know why. But what I do know is that you're strong, and you're going to beat this," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. With each passing day, my grandson's health began to improve. The medical tests started showing promising results, and after a grueling year, the doctors declared him in remission. The relief that washed over me was unlike anything I had ever felt. We didn't just stop at treatment. I enrolled him in a nearby school, encouraged him to make friends, and even took him to soccer practice. He became a vital part of a local team, earning the love and respect of his friends and teachers alike. "Grandma, I made the goal today." He burst into the house one afternoon holding a trophy. "I knew you could do it." I hugged him, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride and happiness. Life wasn't easy, but we managed. My grandson grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. He had fought the battle of his life and emerged victorious thanks to his indomitable spirit and the world-class medical care he received. As for Mark and Sarah, our relationship was strained but civil. They visited occasionally, usually during holidays, but the emotional connection had suffered a blow that seemed irreparable. 15 years after my grandson moved in with me, the doorbell rang one weekend. When I opened the door, Mark and Sarah stood there, expressions unreadable. "We've come to take him back," Mark said, finally breaking the silence. Just then, my grandson walked up behind me. "I'm not going anywhere. You may have given birth to me, but you're not my parents." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and without another word, Mark and Sarah turned and left. I looked at my grandson, my heart swelling with love and pride. Sometimes life thrusts us into battles we never signed up for. Yet it's in those battles that our true selves emerge. Love, I realized, wasn't about blood ties. It was about stepping up when it mattered the most, and in loving my grandson unconditionally, I had also saved myself. But as all things in life, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. but that's a story for another chapter. The years rolled on, each one a testament to the resilience and strength my grandson displayed, both on the soccer field and in life. He flourished into a young man of remarkable character. He was kind-hearted, responsible, and had a good head on his shoulders. We were a team, inseparable and strong. I was in the garden one afternoon, tending to the roses when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Mark's name. A shiver ran down my spine. Calls from Mark were a rarity these days and usually not the bearer of good news. "Hello, Mark," I greeted cautiously. "Mom, it's been a while. How are you?" His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm fine. Thank you." "Mom, I've been thinking. It's been years since... Well, since my son moved in with you. I've been thinking maybe it's time to mend fences." My heart pounded in my chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I think it's time for him to know the whole story, the reasons behind everything. And maybe it's time for us to be a family again." I was skeptical but intrigued. "Do you think Sarah would be open to this?" "She's the one who suggested it," Mark admitted. And so we arranged a meeting. We chose neutral ground, a quaint cafe halfway between our homes. When my grandson and I walked in, Mark and Sarah were already seated, anxiously shifting in their seats. Mark stood up when he saw us. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, son." My grandson nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. Sarah chimed in, "We've missed you. We've missed being a family." I think there's a lot to talk about before we can use the word family. So freely, my grandson spoke up, finally breaking his silence. The air was thick, heavy with years of unspoken pain, regrets, and what-ifs. And then the reckoning began. Sarah went first, telling us about her own troubled childhood, how she'd grown up in a family that valued money over emotions, and how that mindset had distorted her own views on parenting. Mark spoke next, admitting his struggle to balance the woman he loved and the family he was born into. "I should have done better. I failed you both, and I'm sorry." As they spoke, I watched my grandson's face. I could see him processing, re-evaluating the narrative he'd held onto for years. When it was his turn to speak, his words were measured but impactful. "You had choices, both of you. You chose the easier path. Grandma here chose the hard path, the right path. I respect her for that. As for us, maybe there's a way forward, but it's going to take more than just words to make things right." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and respect. "Grandma, what do you think?" "Forgiveness is a powerful thing," I started, "but it doesn't erase the past. We can move forward, but we move forward, changed, eyes wide open, knowing what everyone is capable of, for better or worse." Sarah and Mark nodded, a glimmer of hope mixed with the stark reality of their past choices visible in their eyes. And so we left the cafe that day not as a reunited family, but as individuals finally facing the truth, the whole truth. It was a reckoning years in the making, one that didn't promise a happily ever after, but offered something perhaps more valuable, a chance for genuine redemption and growth. As my grandson and I drove back home, he took my hand and said, "Thank you, Grandma, for being my..."